Hey everyone, welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church. And today we're going to be in 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 through 9. And this is Paul's warning to Timothy about the dangers of the last days. And so we'll kind of look at that from our time frame, and I think of their time, his time frame as well. And I think the parallels of both for us. So we'll read this real quick, just 9 verses. It says, starting in 2 Timothy 3, verse 1, it says, "You should know this, Timothy, that in the last days there will be very difficult times, for people will love only themselves and their money. They will be boastful and proud, scoffing at God, disobedient to their parents, and ungrateful. They will consider nothing sacred. They will be unloving and unforgiving. They will slander others and have no self control. They will be cruel and hate what is good. They will betray their friends, be reckless, be puffed up with pride, and love pleasure rather than God." That doesn't describe what we're living in today. I don't know what is. We'll dive into that a little bit more. It says they will act religious, but they will reject the power that could make them godly. Stay away from people like that. They are the kind of people. I'm sorry. They are the kind who work their way into people's homes and with the confidence of vulnerable women who are burdened with the guilt of sin and controlled by various desires. Such women are forever following new teachings, but they are never able to understand the truth. These teachers oppose the truth, just as I believe that is pronounced Janez and Jambres, or Jamburus, opposed Moses. They have depraved minds and a counterfeit faith, but they won't get away with it this for long. Some days, everyone will recognize what fools they are, just like Janez and Jambres. And so Paul's really hitting hard into this. Like I said, we see that this is Paul knows that this is, you know, that his end is coming soon. And so he's giving warning to Timothy of what the last days are going to look like. And so one of the things we call the last days, we've been living in, quote, the last days ever since the resurrection of Christ. And, you know, it applies to not only Timothy's time, but it also applies to our time as well. I'm sure these are things that Timothy saw. We are seeing them now, and it seems like, in our time frame, it seems like these type of things are we are seeing are worse and worse. I mean, you go back to this to this list that Timothy gives, or Paul gives Timothy at the beginning, and it's, there would be very difficult times, and we see that, and we're starting. It's like it's just starting to compound. I remember, and I know that every generation probably has their events, and I know they have their events and horrible events and things like that. But it seems like ever since I graduated high school, which was, and give my age a little bit here, which was the late 90s, 1999, it's like this compounding effect of just things happening one after the other. It was like, it was a slow, it seemed like every few years you'd have something that would happen, or you'd see just, crazy things happening. But it seems like it's almost compounding, and it's like it was like, oh, every couple of years something would happen. Now it's like every year something happened. Now it's like, well, what's going to happen this week, right? And I'm sure that, access to information, access to news makes that seem a little bit worse than maybe what it was before. But this idea that, we look at this left, like people loving themselves and their money, and it just seems to be getting more and more worse, being boastful and proud and scoffing at God, disobedience and ungratefulness, and this idea of considering nothing sacred, being unloving and unforgiving and slanderous, and no self-control. And it's just like every day we see more and more of that, cruel and hateful, and hate what is good, betraying of friends, being reckless, being puffed up with pride and loving pleasure. And I'm honestly saying this just because it seems like every day all these things are getting worse and worse and worse. And now maybe it's just my age. Maybe it's just, as I get older, maybe it hits me more. I don't know. Maybe it's always been this bad, and now it's just more, the spotlight's put on it more. I don't know, but it does feel like every year almost, and now it's almost like almost every week or every month. It just seems like it's just snowballing. All this stuff's kind of snowballing, and I wonder sometimes if this is what Paul was referring to a little bit, along with probably Timothy seeing similar things as he went through. And so Paul describes what people are going to be like in the last days, and which had already begun. Right? We know that, we talk about that they had already begun. and that people would reject sound teachings and cut themselves off from the power that could make them godly. And and then he talks about the targeting of women especially, and Timothy, for whatever reason, in Timothy and Titus, um there's a Paul focuses heavily on households and women, right? And there's a consistent concern there of these letters with Timothy. And so whether or not the false teachers were targeting women specifically, they may have been, but apparently they were successful with some of them. And so this tends to to his focus there must be that this must be the reason why, because he's focusing on women in this specific instance. They were successful. So, oh my goodness, I can't talk this morning. They were apparently successful with some of them, and moving them over, or teaching them false truths, and then getting the women to go along with this. And so that's why we see some of the writing we think we do about in First Timothy about women not teaching men and stuff like that. Again, that's why we see that, because we had this false teaching that was going on, this corruption and of the message that was going on. And so Paul's very adamant and focusing on this, saying, "Hey, we've got to make sure that this doesn't continue on, that they don't continue this type of teaching." Um, and part of the reason why women may have been targeted in this area, if you remember with Ephesus, you know, because of the way that the culture was set up, there was settings where women were the dominant figures, and they dominated over men, and so that could have been part of the reason why they were targeting women in this specific instance, because of that culture that they lived in, and because that would have made it easier for them to do that. And so again, we don't know 100% sure, but there is the possibility of that. And so then he talks about, and again, I'm probably butchering these names, but I'm doing my best. Jannes and Jambres, and according to tradition, they were the names of the Egyptian sorcerers who opposed Moses. And so, in the end of that, they were saying, warning against them about their depraved minds, and not turning out to be like them. And so, the main thing that Paul's talking about and focusing on here is with the dangers of the last days. Like, look, people are going to become even more morally corrupt than they are now, right? Than they were. And that's going to get worse. And this is one of the things that I think we as Christians need to understand. Like, we get really upset, and almost to a point of I've seen get freak out, because certain things start happening. And I both feel like we're called to have a spirit without fear, right? And not to say that, we shouldn't be afraid sometimes, or that these things shouldn't scare us, but I've seen over and over again where it's like this stuff starts to happen more and more. And instead of Christians being like, okay, this is what the Bible said was going to happen, and so we should be ready for it, it's almost just it's just this complete total freak out mode. And it's like, oh, well, let's shut ourselves in, and let's cut ourselves off and all this stuff. And it's like, no, we should expect this to happen. We should know that this is going to happen. Paul talks about, hey, at the end times, it's going to be difficult, right? Nowhere in the Bible does it say, hey, wait, as we get closer to the end, is it going to get easier, right? I mean, read Revelation. We're going to go through Revelation here in several weeks. It's not a pretty picture of things to come. And so we have to understand that, and we have to understand as Christians that things will, as we get more further and further into the end times, in the end days, that for us, that's not going to be a overwhelmingly joyful time. And now, I don't say all this to be depressing. It can be depressing a little bit, but we have to understand, the Bible gives us plenty of warning. The Bible gives us a plenty of, Jesus talked about the birthing pains, almost like it's going to look like birthing pains for the earth as we get closer to the return of Christ. And so we have to be prepared for that. We have to expect that. We have to understand that. And so, yeah, it's not something we look forward to, right? But in the end result of everything that's going to happen, Christ's return, we look forward to that. And so we know what our reward will be. And so we have to see past all of that, lean on God, lean on the Holy Spirit to get through these times, and not completely freak out, and understand who we are as people, and that we have God on our side. And so I know sometimes lessons like these and things like this is not, people don't like to talk about these a lot. Um, but we have to understand who wins in the end, who is controlled in the end, and understand that these things are going to happen. It was predicted, right? They're saying, look at these are the things that's going to happen. It's going to get worse, right? And what we have to do our best in all this is to be an example, be the example we're called to be, as we we profess Christ and teach people about Christ and spread the good news. That's what we're to do. We're to be the light in all of this, not be the person freaking out when all this starts to happen. We have to put our faith where Christ is. Again, I know it's not encouraging to hear that. It's not. It's like, oh well, I'm going to look forward to this. It's great. No, that's not the kind of attitude I'm saying. Is we have to just be prepared as we go through it. So, as always, I hope everyone learns from this. I know this one wasn't a truly uplifting message, but it's the truth, and so we have to speak the truth. We have to speak. Hey, this is what God says is going to happen. So we have to understand this is what's going to happen. Be prepared for it. And I hope we learn from this and do prepare and get ourselves ready mentally for what we would probably see more and more of as we go more into the future. So, as always, I appreciate everyone who takes time to watch these. I encourage you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so. That way you can continue along with this study with us. And as always, appreciate everyone who takes time to watch, and I hope y'all have a wonderful day.